Rainbow Bridge is a place that people talk about on the internet. Uh, it's a place where you cross the bridge in the afterlife and meet up with all your pets that you previously had during your life. Happy place of reunion in the afterlife. So, presumably, the pets must cross there at some point to get to the other side. So, a frequent issue comes up is, well, when's it time to send your pet across Rainbow Bridge? Now, earlier, I owned a pet sitting business, and something that came up a handful of times, and it was incredibly awkward, is when a couple who owned typically a dog would, one of the people would approach me and say, hey, the dog's getting, kind of having difficulties, having problems. When's it time to, send it to the vet and euthanize it? Now, the translation of that is the person talking to me thought it was time for the pet to go, meaning the other person thought it wasn't time. Now, being an incredibly intelligent person I immediately spotted this trap for what it was, and I gave the same answer most veterinarians give, which is, oh, when it's time, you'll know. But in fact, that's a cop out. It's a way to avoid getting into something awkward and emotional. So I'm going to explore the idea of when is it time. So if you get into a situation where you do have, and typically what happens is if you have a couple and they have a dog or a cat, usually one of them ends up bonding it with it more than the other person. And so when you have a situation where one person believes it's time for the animal to be euthanized and the other one does not, the one who does not always takes precedence. They're always right. So I know a lot of people, and I've seen situations where uh, an acquaintance of mine, their dog was definitely in the suffering stage, and this person had friends berating them about that. Oh no, you're being cruel letting this dog live. It's time for it to go. You're to kill it would be a gift and all this other stuff. And really, it's not a kind thing to do to berate someone in that manner because essentially what you're doing is projecting your ideas of when an animal should live and die is purely a projection from you. And that's both parties are doing this. One party is basically saying, gee, suffering and all that stuff bothers me a lot. I wouldn't want to be in that situation. So I would do the right thing and euthanize it immediately. Or the other person would say, well, I'm not ready to say goodbye yet. I'm going to, basically drag this out. Uh, and both people are projecting. So, how do I come to my conclusion? Well, the first thing I bring up is the idea of because people sit there and try to rationalize. Well, what would the animal want if it had the power? Well, so let's try to get into the animal's mind as much as we can without projecting ourselves into it. So, what is the most common trope of like the pet near death? Well, it basically tries to find a dark, quiet place to go hide. So what's going on there? I mean, this is pretty common. I mean, a lot of people, if you haven't had it happen for yourself, probably know someone who's told you, yeah, this happened, or animal wants to go under a porch or into a closet or whatever. So what's going on here? I mean, seems to be more or less as close a universal experience for these animals as you can come up with. What's going on? Is the animal suddenly going, alas, I've come to grips with my mortality. I realize death is nigh, and I am preparing myself for this journey? Not too likely. What's far more likely is there's an instinct kicking in. An instinct is saying, hey, you are in as rough shape as you've ever been. Things are really, really bad. You are completely vulnerable. You are completely dangerous. If you have any hope at all of pulling out of this, you need to go someplace to hide to try to sleep this off. You need to basically get away from everything that could be a potential danger if you have any hopes at all in coming out of this. Does that make more sense? So if it does, the instinct of the animal is it wants to continue. And if you're looking at a creature with limited ability to grasp things, it makes a lot of sense. Okay? It can't conceive of an afterlife. It can't conceive of what does it mean to no longer be in pain. I mean, they don't sit there and in their minds go, boy, I remember when I was real young and I could do this and this and this and it didn't hurt and all this other stuff, and my bowels weren't giving out and all this other stuff. It's very unlikely they can make those kind of comparisons in their mind. They live in the here and now, and it's all about the best now that's possible. So if one person isn't ready to say goodbye, uh, you are not going against the will of the animal. Now, if another person is saying, well, no, 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 it's cruel to let the animal suffer, that's projection. As is the other side, that's projection. But the point being is, if the person who wants to euthanize early gets their way, it's unalterable. Whereas the person who opts to hang on and keep the pet going, at any time they can reverse their decision. And I mean, millions of animals die every day uh, without the benefit of a barbiturate cocktail. Now, just to kind of throw it, this kind of bit of a downer, this whole video is, but uh, the idea of afterlife in the first place. Now, at its best, the afterlife is a pretty sketchy concept for human beings. I mean, uh, very few people claim to have been there and back. And even the general understand, essentially, if you look at different religions giving you their interpretations of what it looks like, um, it's not particularly well thought. I mean, there's essentially limited stories about it, general descriptions, but there isn't like an entire book describing what it's like to be in the afterlife. Now, if you take that one step further and apply it to animals, a lot of religions uh, don't even go as far as to suggest that animals are entitled to some form of afterlife. So if you look at it from that aspect, life might be the only thing they're ever going to have. And by early euthanizing, you're taking that little bit from them. So throw out a few things to understand where I'm coming from this, because you're because obviously I'm using terms like projection, so it's very easy to say, I think somehow you're projecting yourself onto this as well. Ooh, and that's just true. But I've been on both sides of this. Uh, I had one dog that was essentially failing. And the dog was very near and dear to me. And, my wife was ready for it to go. I wasn't. And, I dug in until I felt it was time for it to happen. On the flip side, there was another dog, nice dog. I really liked him, but he was far more my wife's dog than he was mine. And he got Alzheimer's or doggy dementia or whatever you want to call it. And every morning between 2 and 4 in the morning, he'd start barking and howling and freaking out. Uh, Canine cognitive disorder, or he just didn't have any idea why he was barking or whatever. And I literally ended up staying up with that dog for almost 2 months before we found a very expensive medication to mitigate it. However, I'll tell you, during that 2 month period, if my wife for a second would have said, "Hey, let's euthanize him," I would have, "Hey, let's do that," because this is screwing up my sleep and this is not good for me at all. But uh, I'm willing to go the extra mile because she wanted him around, so I was willing to help out. But again, I would have euthanized that dog without any hesitation at all because it had gotten to the point where there was no joy left in it for me at all. And a lot of that comes, so that's kind of what I'm getting at here is animals, there are possessions. We own them, we buy them, they belong to us. They're there to bring us joy. And even when they're getting into the point where they're starting to get decrepit, you still get some of that out of them. That's why you want to hang on to them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, as long as you're doing what's possible for them. Okay. And I think animals, to a certain extent, register pain in a completely different way than we do. I mean, how many times have you noticed that, all of a sudden you'll see like a dog or a cat developing a limp or something? And, if you talk to somebody who hasn't been with you constantly, they'll say, "Oh, well, they've kind of had that limp for a long time." They just deal with it. They don't sit there and kind of get up and go, "Oh, my leg," and they don't sit there and they just like, "Okay, well, hey, I got a pain, so just muscle through it." If we're gonna go for a walk, I'll just my way through it and enjoy the walk because that's what I'm here to do. Is I'm here to have fun with my people. That's the way animals, especially pets, view their world. So if you're still deriving joy from them, I don't see anything wrong with them still being around. Now, if you still have any doubts about my creds on this, we did have a situation where we had a dog. Now, didn't have any particular attachment to this one at all. Uh, it was a very old stray that ended up in our care. And uh, because of really stupid circumstances, the way the law works, what had happened is it was a stray. We took it in. Nobody acknowledged that that no one wanted it. It was very clearly somebody dumped it. It was near death. They dumped it. Uh, by giving it a little bit of care, we got maybe an extra 5 days of life out of it. And uh, because we admitted we had found it, uh, no vet would euthanize it because of the way the laws are written here. So it's like, oh, well, you found it. Yeah, you can't euthanize it unless you've had it like 15 days. So I did it. It was very humane, very quick. Nothing joyous, but it's something I can do. So I'm just explaining that I'm not squeamish about the idea. It's not like every single animal I have has to live to the point, you know, where its bowels fail and blood's coming out of their ears, and they're just basically moaning in agony. Uh, I recognize that there are different levels, and I can deal with them emotionally easily. So ultimately, I guess what I'm getting at here is if you are a couple in a situation where one of you thinks it's time and the other one doesn't, if you're the one who thinks it's time, really critically look at why it is you think you're right. And instead of making it difficult on your significant other, be supportive, work through it, get done with it. And I mean, don't make a big deal about it because the animal doesn't want to die. That's just you projecting. The animal doesn't want to be out of pain because it doesn't have the concept to sit there and say, oh, I was like this today and now I'm something, I was something different previously. It doesn't remember these different states of being out of pain and being in pain. So uh, these are just your idea of how things work as opposed to what the animal actually wants. Now, the one caveat I would throw in there is usually when an animal stops eating and drinking, that to me is a cue that, yeah, they don't have the energy left to do this anymore. And whatever else I'm getting out of it is pointless. So uh, you may say that's their point where they've given up. Maybe they have, but it's clearly the point where they're no longer capable. They don't have the strength and will to push on beyond that point. And that's an opinion. I mean, if you reach that point and you're still not ready, that's your call. Okay, so hopefully I'll stay away from topics so grim in the future, but this was just something rattling around my head that I had the urge to talk about. What do you think about this? Uh, is uh, do you buy into what I'm saying about the idea that the animal is there essentially for the joy of the person who they've bonded with? Uh, is there some kind of obligation uh, to euthanize an animal, and what would be uh, your red line that would say that an animal shouldn't have to go any further than this, before it's euthanized? All right. Well, if you enjoyed this content, you probably have something wrong with you, but please like it. Uh, if you think someone might find this useful, please share it with them. And obviously, I have eclectic videos in terms of topics. Uh, I may do other things you may find interesting, so consider subscribing. I put out a handful of these a week. All right, well, thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.